there was a Selkie.
Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie. Once there was a Selkie.
Once there was a story about a Selkie, and this is the film about how that story got made. So when it comes to inspiration behind The Selkie's Wife, there's two major things I would say. There's a 2022 short story that I wrote, which is called The Selkie's Wife. Ingrid, our main character, the Selkie's wife, is trapped in the waves while Rona, the Selkie who has been trapped on land by the fishermen, is unable to leave, and Ingrid, her wife who's trapped in the waves, can't do anything about it because her Selkie coat is damaged. She can't strip it off, and she's feeling really helpless about that she can't follow Rona onto land and help get her out of the house. It started off as a short story, like I said, at the start of 2022, and then I developed it a bit as that year went on, and then at the start of 2023 I began to realise that maybe it didn't have to just be a short story. Maybe there was some way that I could develop it in some sort of form, and because at that point I was beginning to think about what my next solo theatre show might be, two forces joined together to make the show that we have today. And the other main inspiration for this show as it stands now is a Gaelic song called Oran Aroin, which I learned from a Julie Fowlis album, and in it the daughters of the King of Norway have been magically turned into Selkies, and they're cursing the fact that they've been forced to become seals. I just loved that depiction of female rage. So taking those elements of that Selkie tale and mixing it up with some other Selkie tales that I found in my own writings combined is very much what makes the vibe of the show, and very much makes the vibe of the show quite centered on revenge. So there's a couple of different themes behind why I wanted to write this show. I think one of the main ones, and one of the most obvious ones, is that I am a queer person who studied a master's degree in folklore and ethnology at the University of Aberdeen in 2021, and was quite frustrated by the narrow view of whose stories get told in folklore. So there's a lot of old dead white men and not a lot of representation for the other types of people that we all know existed in the past. This show is me giving my own offering to that cause, my own way of starting to build up a catalogue of different stories that are being told, so it's not just the cisgender heterosexual experience that's always told when we tell fairy tales. I also wrote this show from the perspective of being a folk musician, so there's a lot of folk music in this show, both played live and played in soundscapes. Another major theme of the show that expanded over time, so that theme of it being queer representation in folklore, and the theme of it being a way of expressing myself both as a writer and as a folk musician, they were there right from the start. But a theme which appeared over time was that it became clear that this was also a show about my experiences with living with chronic pain, and the ways that manifested. That had very much been there from the start as well, but subconsciously, and it took me a while to realise that it was in there, and to decide whether I was going to lean into it or whether I was going to take it out. And I decided to lean into it, as anyone who's seen the show already will definitely know it's lent into. Some of you might have already heard of the concept of shadow self, but that's very much of what I think of when I think of Ingrid now, that she is like a manifestation of all the not nice, frustrated, angry bits of me that get to come out in this really vengeful character on stage, which is great fun. So one of the major aspects of this show is the soundscapes. I would say it's probably the calling card of this show, it's the vibe of this show, that there are these big, immersive mix of interviews and Foley sounds and multi-track folk music and experimental music are kind of brought together into the sound world. And I would say that if you've heard any of the music of Nightworks, you will immediately understand what I mean when I say that they were a pretty massive inspiration for me in terms of how my soundscapes work. The other main influence for how my sound art works in this show is Volker Bertelmann, who was the composer for All Quiet on the Western Front. And I was just so inspired by that score and so inspired by the way that he decided to create these eerie, creepy, otherworldly sounds with purely acoustic instruments, and then the way that he made them sound as weird as he did was through distortion and echo and making them sound lower than they should be or higher than they should be. Sounds that you hear in the soundscapes, I've used the same idea. They're from natural instruments and from acoustic instruments that I've meddled with, until there's a bit of the show where it folds in on itself and kind of breaks down into this weird thing and collapses. And that is the only point in the show where you hear this like electronic synth drone noise. And
one look was all it took, help gleaming, eyes glistening, all grace and no guile, one song and I was lost. I would have given anything for the pain to just stop! For 1 hour, for 1 minute, for 1 second. When I was wee, my father and I used to go to the pool in St Andrews. While the other kids chucked themselves into the deep end, my favourite thing to do was to hold my nose, close my eyes, give myself momentum with just a little jump and sink down to the bottom of the shallow end pool floor. Cross-legged in another world. I have always told stories. Stories are what keep the wolf from the door. Stories are what keep us human. Who did you kill at the end of your sword? What did he stand for and what was your cause? Liars and thieves, they can tell my story. Ripped off and covered in their own place of glory. Rise deep to me what they did to those before me, but I hold your hand and I know that you'll never be.
Absolutely nothing of her skills.
Once there was a Selkie. She doesn't usually get a name. Not in the way that men tell the story, at any rate. Oh, I can do that better.
So the last bit that I want to chat about in terms of my inspiration for the show is the costume and the set design. So I've been talking about how there are these different versions of me on stage, and that's quite confusing because I am one person and there's not much staging, and I wanted to give people to give me a hand to know which version of myself I am at any given time, but also to give people a bit of a visual clue as to what the hell's going on, basically. So there's an academic jacket for academic me, there's a scarf for when I'm being the storyteller, like a shawl, and then I have my Selkie coat for being Ingrid, which is just a cardigan, but it's amazing how well it works actually in situ. And then when I'm being more like genuinely myself. I'm not wearing anything because it's just me. Decided on something that was going to be pretty easy to move around in case I had the opportunity to tour the show in places that weren't theatres but were more just like spaces. So I've gone with a coat stand which folds down into two pieces, which is useful, a vintage suitcase and a violin stand and a chair, and in some places I also need a mic and in some places I don't, and that's it. But actually just having a couple of things to frame the space and give you different areas to do different things in is actually so useful. Chose the chair because as someone with chronic pain, standing for an hour-long show is not, I mean, I could do it once and then the next night I would really regret my choices. It actually meant that I had this really fantastic chance to think about, okay, how do I use levels? How do I show that sitting down is one character, standing up is another character? I think it definitely made it into much of a stronger show. A much stronger show than it would have been if I'd just been standing in place for an hour. So that was really empowering. So what's next for the show? I think in terms of the Selkie's Wife, the show, I think it's pretty much done. I think it's ready to be shared with people and I can't wait. I think this concept of queering folktales is not something that I'm finished with. I think I have many more ideas of what that might look like and how that might go. So whether that turns into a storytelling performance with lots of different stories or a collection of short tales or whatever else might come out of it, I'm really still engaged with the idea of how can we tell the stories of more people, how can we make our own representation in folklore.